Hello, Hi, everyone. I think I'm live. Okay, it's Charlene Lee, and I'm going to be talking today about how to organize for AI, in particular, the importance and the role of AI councils or working groups or whichever you want to call these things. These are cross functional groups that help the organization work through the various opportunities in AI, especially with generative AI, and then also identify the applications, the risk, the compliance aspects of it, basically the whole kit and caboodle. And today I want to talk about why it's so important and how some organizations are starting to do this from some of the research that we've been doing. So, first of all, a couple things. Would love to welcome everyone and please share where you're coming from. And also, how are you organizing for AI? What are the natures of the cross functional team? Who are you putting on it? How are you giving them the charge of what they are doing, their responsibilities? How often do they meet? As many details you can provide because it's super helpful because we're so early on. And I'm excited to talk about this because as a change from thinking about all the great new technologies, we're going to do something really boring, which is to talk about governance and oversight, which I think is so important because in my work in looking at disruptive technologies and transformations, you can't do the transformation part, the big, fun, exciting new technologies and the transformations and the changes without also having a really strong focus on discipline, on order, on prioritization, excuse me, and alignment. So these two things have to go hand in hand, the change that you can envision, but also the order that's needed to make it all happen. So that's what we're going to talk about today is how do you organize for generative AI, especially when it is constantly changing, when it's constantly demanding that you look at things from a new perspective. I share with people that I oftentimes feel like my hair is on fire every morning when I wake up and I open up my email, go through my feeds, and realize so many things have yet again changed. So this AI council, this working group, I'm just going to call it an AI council for now, is an important part of your generative AI strategy. So let's get into it. And again, please chime in and share what you're finding and hearing and seeing too. So we have one comment here from Rupi. Without governance and oversight, growth cannot be sustainable. Great point. Hence, this discussion is really in need of the hour. So thank you so much for chiming in and sharing those thoughts. I want to go through and talk about very specifically why you need to have an AI council, especially when it comes to generative AI. Because you could put one together for every single possible new technology that comes along, and it doesn't necessarily require it. I think that generative AI absolutely requires it for a couple reasons. First of all, it is transformative. And anyone who's experienced and touched this realizes, oh my goodness, there was like a before and after when you've used these tools, when you can see that this is going to create so many changes in the way we do work and could create competitive advantage that you need to get ahead of and to stay on top of as an organization. I'll just give an example when e-commerce hit and people were sort of just dabbling in it, trying a few things. If you didn't have your act together and looked at this as a strategic challenge across the organization, you are not going to be able to take full advantage and develop a competitive advantage. And I think generative AI is one of those areas where it is truly transformative. And so, even in the beginning, if you may not be doing huge amounts of transformative work, you can understand it could potentially lead to that. So, you need to start thinking at that strategic level right from the very beginning. Also, generative AI is hitting across the entire organization. Unlike other forms of digital transformation, we don't have the luxury of time and the luxury of some semblance of control over how fast and where you want to start using these technologies. We could do that in the past with other digital technologies. With generative AI, it is literally walking in through the back door in the pockets of your employees on their phones and in their laptops. It is anybody with a browser can use these tools. And it's going to be very difficult to tell people not to use this when it's so clear what the benefits could be to their jobs. So this is hitting across the organization. And so we need to have an organization wide perspective on what to do with this. It's also bigger than just technology. Most organizations have some group looking at some function of artificial intelligence, but it's usually buried in a corner in a part of IT. We need to elevate that group out of that corner into the rest of the organization and also give them that business perspective to understand how this technology can be used right now, today. Also, the business leaders need to be aligned with the technologists so that they can get up to speed and upskilled in terms of what the technology can do. Finally, there is a great need for the board to be involved. And so I'm going to be talking next about how the board needs to be thinking about a body, a council that works at the board level, and also one that works at the company level. The board it's really important for the board to be thinking about this because your board of directors is charged. They have the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the organization's moving in the right direction. They are looking out for all stakeholders, not just shareholders, for the thriving of the organization. And it's clear that generative AI is at that level where they need to be having this oversight across the organization. So again, we'll be talking about how the board's responsible in the role in thinking about that AI council is such an important part. So let's see. I have a couple other. Joe, thank you so much for chiming in. Thank you for chiming in about business transformation. I did speak at the World Business Forum in New York City, and again, just really looking forward to talking about AI and this role here. So thank you for joining today, Joe. Let's see. Okay, let me talk about the two levels of the advisory council, this AI council. At the board level, again, as I mentioned, the board is tasked with ensuring that the organization's strategy can anticipate and incorporate any advances in technology, and especially with generative AI. It's also responsible for establishing any sort of governance and oversight of the executive team, especially when it comes to the ethical and responsible use of AI in the organization. So the council at the board level needs to be thinking of these long-term implications, but also looking at the short-term considerations and looking across all stakeholders, not again, just shareholders, but also across customers, employees, looking at the ecosystems of partners, but also societal and community impacts of these technologies. And the idea is that some members of the board of directors would be sitting on this. So a couple members would be sitting on a subcommittee, but they could also be pulling in outside experts, again, in an advisory capacity to the board. And this is, again, to just keep the board up to speed. There could be, again, some people from the organization with areas of expertise. We'll talk about that operational AI council and how it could be supporting the board level AI council. But I think having a board level council, working group, subcommittee, whichever way you want to call it, reporting into the board of directors is a really important thing to do. I've been speaking to several board of directors and boards, and just hearing that, again, this is an ongoing topic. They're saying that this is something we're talking about at each of our board meetings. Some of them have been talking about it for a year. Others are just beginning to add it to their agenda. And there's a sense that we need to get our arms around this. So we need to put a subcommittee around it, an AR council to advise us as a board on what's going on with the company strategy. Now, I'm going to spend most of the time today talking about the operational AI council. This is the one sitting inside of the company. And its purpose is to make sure there's coordination across the entire organization, including the business leaders, technology leaders, HR. I'll talk about all the people who would be sitting on it. And the idea is to say, how does our corporate strategy, our company strategy, need to adjust, change, or just be completely, some parts of it just completely redone because of generative AI? And strategy is simply an idea of how we're going to do and execute on our goals, on our objectives, on our purpose at every single line function level. which is why, again, it's so important to have this cross functional level because you can't just do something in a line of business and in generative AI and not have it impact what's happening in IT. So imagine if somebody said in marketing, we're just going to start using these tools like Midjourney and not coordinate with AI, with our IT department or with our risk or legal and compliance. You can see that's just not going to work. These are all connected parts. And so we need to be very connected in terms of how we deploy these technologies into our functions. So the key question here becomes two things: where does it report into, and who gets to sit on this council? And this is the chicken and egg because I've seen all sorts of different models from councils that are primarily technology driven, internally focused, not customer facing at all. And the makeup of that council is going to be very different than a council where the strategy is really focused much on the customer experience and enhancing it, the data strategy that they have to have with customer data, and then also, for example, the training of employees who are going to be facing customers using these technologies. So, depending on where you think your first initial bets are going to be, how AI is going to impact your strategy, then that gives you a starting point of who you want to put onto this council. So let's see, a couple points here before I get into who actually sits on where. Mark has a great point here. How do you choose the right people for the company council? Fear and excitement are everywhere since people generally dislike change. Do you select council members with the appropriate temperament to drive progress? Absolutely great question, Mark. I think it's important to have people who are forward looking, absolutely can see the possibility. So these are not going to be your curmudgeons who are just sitting crossing their arms like, why do we even have this? It's definitely people who want to be forward thinking, but who also can think about things on a very pragmatic level. So their heads are not in the clouds. They're grounded in thinking, I want to have this new thing happen. But how do we think about the steps? What are the operational, tactical steps needed to execute on this far-reaching area? And it's difficult because you could have different levels of working groups, and I'll give an example in just a second. How again, there's a high-level group that's thinking about the vision and the strategy, but they also have people working out all the details within the various functions. But I think you, Mike, you raise a really good point here, which is you also need to have on this council the people who are the so-called breaks, the people in risk, in legal, and in compliance. And oftentimes those people are seen as the no people. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do this. I think it's really important to get the people from those parts of the organization who are thinking about the risk and the mitigations that are needed, but also want to enable our understanding we need to be able to do these things from a business perspective. So how do we put in the right governance, the right policies, the right training to ensure that we mitigate the risk rather than just putting an X through everything? So having the right people from both sides, the people who can say yes, but also can be very pragmatic, the people who can say, wait a minute, we need to be thinking about something, but they can be problem solving for how to address those concerns and those issues. So great question, Mark. Thank you for asking that. So I want to go into greater detail about what this operational council is going to do, and in particular, what their responsibilities are. Their key responsibility is to identify which parts of the strategy can continue, which parts need to change, the new applications that you can develop. How do you prioritize them? How are we going to allocate limited resources? What are the trainings and educations that are needed? What kind of governance and oversight that's needed? And it's putting all of these policies and trainings and everything in place to make sure that it works. And then, very importantly, putting in the measurements to see if it's all working together. So there's a lot to put into this council. So who do we put on it? Well, obviously you need IT because it is technology. And I'm going to go through each of these roles, but also address the questions and the roles and the importance that they play on this council. And you could have any sort of variety of combinations of these roles. And my key question here is for you to answer is, what's the minimum number of people you need to have on this working group? Instead of trying to include everybody, he may have a core working group and then other people who are satellites who need to be brought in. So let me just go through the roles. IT, obviously. Um, how can tech support these different initiatives? What's the state of our data? What partnerships are needed? What third parties do we need to have? So is the IT in a place? Is our tech stack in a place where we can actually do everything? You clearly need the business people, the lines of business leaders, somebody who can understand what the existing business strategy is and how it needs to change. We need a perspective on customers. This could be coming from customer experience, from marketing, about how do we build customer engagement? How much transparency is needed on the part of our customers to understand what is happening with our AI efforts? Uh, we need to have the creatives and the designers and the builders because they're the ones who are going to actually build these applications. Can we actually do this? HR, our people perspectives. Do we have the skills? What are the implications for our workforce, for our talent, for development, for upskilling, for acquisitions, and potentially for having to let go of people? From risk, what are the emerging risks that are coming up? How do we think about them? How do we mitigate them? How big are they? And how big of an impact could it have on our perceived value that we could be creating? And then finally, legal and compliance. What are the laws and the regulations that are changing? And how do we comply with them in the future? Do we have the processes and the technology to be able to track all the things we have to do in the future to be able to comply? So I just went through 7 different groups of people who could potentially sit on this council. And let me give you a couple examples of how some organizations have put them in. And again, I'm going to completely mask these because we are still in the research phase of a book that my co-author Katja Welsh and I are writing. And the one example I'll give you is this one organization where their AI efforts are primarily to enhance the customer experience and to focus on, so that's the external focus. And then the internal focus is, well, we can write a lot more software a lot faster. So they knew that these are 2 priorities and 2 use cases and applications early on from generative AI. So they created a cross-functional group that consisted of the commercial business leaders, the technology people, people in operations and data. And they brought these people together very quickly, again, a very small working group of just 4 people. And they made it really small so they could move fast. And they also had dedicated resources in legal, in technology, in cybersecurity that they could tap into so that they could, again, get the expertise that they needed. And the reason they did it really small was they wanted to avoid the large bureaucratic processes that usually accomplish very large technology implementations. If you've ever gone through these large technology applications being deployed, they are really slow. They involve everybody. They make sure everyone's aligned. Everything is crossed across every T, every I is dotted. And it's a formal process to get these big technology infrastructure changes made. So we're not going to do that. We're going to make it very small, experimental, reports directly into the CEO. And the idea is to get a point of view established very quickly, to get some experiments going for customer experience and for software development. And they had working teams that met either weekly or biweekly in these specific areas, and then would meet monthly with executives. The board was also very interested. So the board was asking for reports over the past 2 quarters to give them highlights. And they're talking about the use cases and other areas of oversight and guidance with the board. So it's an interesting thing about being able to go fast, but not too fast. They wanted to see what advantages they could have in terms of revenue generation, but also see what the cost savings were. And very importantly, they were keen to have legal on the side and available for advice, but not necessarily in the room, because they felt that as long as they had broad parameters of what they could legally do, they were going to stay safe. If they had any questions, they could go and ask legal. But rather than having legal in the room, always constantly over the shoulder. It felt like they had more freedom to be able to do this. So that's one example of one AI council. Another one was an organization that decided early on they were only going to do applications that were internally facing. So they just said, anything that's facing external is just not the right time for us to do. There's too much risk. Even with a human, and we always want a human in the loop. So we want to use this primarily to think about ways that we can change our internal processes first as we figure out what can and can't be done externally with our customers. So their AI council is led by their chief digital officer and their chief information officer. And they have people from policy, from the legal department, from HR in the council too as well. And HR was a really important part of this organization because they believed that this was going to have a big impact on how they actually did their work. And so they wanted HR involved right from the very beginning, from day one, to think about the workforce implications, and also to think about how employees would want to use these tools or not want to use these tools. They also did something very interesting. They created a form that employees could fill out. That if they thought of a new way to use generative AI in their job, they could fill out the form and apply for that to be an experiment that the AI Council would then consider. And the AI Council would look at these forms, at these requests every single week and get right back to them saying, yes, let's go forward with that experiment, or no, it's not the right time and this is why. I thought this is a really interesting way to be thinking about the use of the AI Council, to be very internally focused with a very clear mandate of what it could do, but also what it wasn't going to do. And it just made everyone focus and align on what the strategy was going to be in the short term. So one of the things they did was they created training to make generative AI mandatory training across all employees. They made additional training for prompt engineering training, optional and available for people. And they had certain use cases that were approved for people to use these generative AI tools in. And they used primarily off the shelf tool sets. So they didn't have to have huge roll ups in terms of their internal tool sets. So they just use the existing external tool sets that are readily available to them in the marketplace, and then made sure people were trained explicitly on how to use those tools inside the organization. So those are two quick examples of two very different AI councils. And the reason I give those two examples is that, again, it keeps coming back to some very, very crucial ideas. And this is what I want to end on today, is what are the crucial must-haves when it comes to your AI council? The first and most important thing is that it has to exist and align with your existing corporate strategy and the way that your organization works. This is not something where it can be on the outside. It is not a skunk works. This is not something that is often exploring brand new areas and territories. It is very much aligned with the priorities of your organization. That organization, the first one that I talked about with customer experience and software development, customer experience is everything to this company. So it made sense that customer experience was at the very top of their list of things to explore and how they could use generative AI. And the other one, they were very focused on the internal workings of the organization. And so, again, depending on the priorities and the strategy of the organization, make sure your AI council is clearly aligned and working within those parameters. The second thing is get the highest level of executive buy-in that you can. Because this is so transformative, depending on where that focus is it at the CEO level, at the board level? Is it at the digital chief digital officer, CIO level? Again, aligning it with the highest level executive that you can is so important with making sure that the purpose and the focus of this group is appropriate. And then the other thing I would say is to really balance the oversight with the actual doing of the work. What was interesting across all of these examples that I've been looking at is that there was a small working group, but an extended uh, team of people who could be delegated the work. And so while the small team at the very top of the council was very small, they could have these strategic conversations. The actual work cascaded and was delegated down deeply into the organization so that these tentacles of responsibility were moving across the entire organization. So this is not so much taking over. This small group isn't necessarily setting all the strategy, but it's again, it's just a representation of all the work that everyone else is doing inside the organization. And then the last thing I would say is to two more things. Again, really driving to tangible business outcomes, being really clear about the measurement of we're going to do these things and this is how we're going to measure success. So again, not something pie in the sky experiments happening, but really tying it back into the business strategy. And the last thing that I've heard from various people is that it's important to evolve these AI councils. Just as the strategy will change, just the same as the focus and the strategic emphasis of the organization will change over time. It may be something that's internally focused for now. But then as you add in more customers, the makeup of your council is going to change. It may move up into different parts of the organization of where it reports into. But realize that just as much as generative AI is changing as a technology, the strategy and the way you implement the strategy is going to have to evolve over time too, as well. So that's what I have for today. Just wanted to get it out there how important it is to organize thoughtfully and intentionally for generative AI. And what I'm going to do right now is okay, so for next week, I wanted to just give you a little teaser. I want to just talk about how we can actually put together a comprehensive generative AI strategy in 90 days. And yes, in 90 days. So this is one of those things where over the course of a quarter, you can actually step by step create a generative AI strategy for your organization. There's a shortcut 30-day, like must do kind of things that I'll go over in that time period too, as well. But this is really creating a longer term strategy of where you're going to head. So, first of all, the idea of creating a generative AI strategy sounds crazy when everything is changing all the time. But the idea that you could actually pull together a very comprehensive strategy in 90 days is completely feasible, and we'll lay out some of those steps of how to do that in the next session next week. Again, Tuesday, September 19th at 9 a.m., the regular time. So, again, I thank you for joining me on this conversation. I would love to hear from you about how you're actually organizing for AI. What are you doing? What are you finding working? What are you finding doesn't work? Again, so much of my research is based on the conversations that I have with all of you, each of you. So please reach out to me. You know where to find me on the various channels that you're watching me on. And please, I would love to hear from you and hear your questions and examples. All right, take care, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye bye.